name is Prakash Bettadapur. Thank you for the introduction. I think that was part of the introduction. I've been working in big networking companies all this time, and I was responsible for Agile Transformation in Cisco Systems for about a 2,000 people organization, and then a 65,000 whole company transformation. I was part of that responsibility as well. How many of you know what Agile is, what we are talking about in Agile? How many of you know what Agile is? Yes? No? Okay. So, I'm prepared for that now. There were two parts of this presentation. One, the title is for Agile Transformation, which was an advanced part of the presentation. But then I realized who would be there or who would not, they would not know what Agile is. So I'm going to talk about the new part that I introduced into this one, which is talking about what Agile is. How many of you are doing projects? Okay. How many of you are doing software projects? How many of you are in software? Do you know about anything on software development? No? Okay. How many of you are from computer science? Okay. So, whether it's computer science, software development, or whether it's any other projects, there are various methodologies with which you can develop your project. So, in software development, there was a traditional path which was called as waterfall development. Anybody has heard about that word, waterfall? Okay. So I think I really have to go basic on what I'm going to talk about today. Sorry about that. So, when you want to do something in software, how many of you have seen road construction projects that are going on? Okay, that's good. So what happens in many of these kinds of projects is, you know when things are going on very well. You can see them, what's actually happening day by day. These are all the projects that people have done many times before. So you know how to plan them, how to execute them, you know what's going on. Whether it's building a road, building a bridge, or building a dam, or anything that's, let's say, civil or mechanical, building a car, you can actually see what's going on. So you can, it's always, building a car is also very well known how you do that. So you can know these are the 100 steps that you need to do to build a car, and each one takes how much time, and then you build that. It's a very, very difficult problem, different problem when you're developing products in software. How many of you know what is software? Okay. So in software, what happens, like it's your mobile phone or any other kind of software that is enterprise software or anything, you really don't know what's going on in those bits and pieces that are being developed. It's very abstract. I've been in projects where we knew that this project will take 1 year, and we were all reporting, yeah, it's going on well, it's going on well, it's going on well. And people will show the project progress as, oh, we did 10% first month, 20% next month, like that. You come to the end near 90%, and then from 90% to 100%, it took another year to get it done. Because you never know how much progress is happening when you're developing software. It's very non-quantifiable in terms of how it happens. So how do you, so traditionally what happened for software development is that people started putting exact steps down, what needs to be done. And they said, oh, you write all the requirements, then you start doing the design, and then you start writing the code, and they typically put 1 month for requirements, 1 month for design, 3 months for coding, and then testing, and then releasing the product. This kind of procedure was called waterfall because it was like a waterfall, one after the other, different phases. This waterfall method, I'm going to show some results which was successful at one time when things were not changing so rapidly. There was a lot of time between when the requirements were conceived and when the product was required. And in that time, the requirements did not change because things were moving very slow. How many of you see new products coming out on your mobile phone, apps? Very fast. In a month, you'll have 10 new apps coming in. And people won't even have thought about the application, and a new application will come within a month. How is that possible? There's a rapid change that's happening in software. And for that reason, because the changes are so rapid, the traditional waterfall way of developing software did not work anymore. And that's where the agile software development methodology came in. And we'll talk a little bit more about those kind of things in this presentation. This is for software, but it can apply to any other project where the results are unknown, what you need to develop is unknown, how you can measure day-to-day progress is not known. So in all those cases, you can use this agile methodology. So not just knowing how to do agile is important, how you transform an existing large organization from what they were doing traditionally, spending a lot of time on activities that were meant to show how things are, where we are on the project, versus really doing the work. That's the transformation from waterfall methodology to agile methodology, and that's what I was driving in Cisco Systems and many other places. I will not cover that part of it here. I'll just cover the basics of what agile is all about, and then you guys can ask questions about that, and we'll end at that today. Okay? So here is the topic. What is agile? Why agile? When it is done well, and how to succeed in doing the transformation, some success stories, and then conclusions. I will probably cover the first 3 topics only of this presentation, because that's probably going to be enough, because the other ones are not necessarily applicable for this audience right now. So let's talk about agile. How many of you understood if there is a need for agile or not? Do you want me to stop and answer some questions if you guys have any questions? No? Okay. Yes. Yes. Yes.
But we understood, like, whenever I want to start a project, so it is traditional way of doing. You gave an example of road also, road construction. But we could not able to understand what exactly that agile is. Even though you are giving a definition, details. If you tell waterfall, okay, I can understand.
Right.
Levels are there in level it is going to reach the ground, and there are different, by the time it reaches ground, that 90 to 100% that range is going to be very stressful and very important phase.
Right.
It can extend or it can finish in that particular time.
Right.
But coming to this particular agile, how it's going to be?
Okay, we will talk about that one. That is the main topic we'll talk in this presentation. How that works. Yes, thank you. So, there are 2 terms that I'm going to introduce, Agile and Scrum. And then there are additional terms that we can talk about. I'll just give their names for you to look up on Wikipedia or Google or anywhere. There's a lot of material on this topic, and this is really high runner for all the engineering students, especially those in software development. So those who are interested, you can look up even more, and I can talk about it also in any other forum. So from Wikipedia, what's Agile software development? It refers to a group of software development methodologies. It's a group of software development methodologies based on iterative development. How many of you know what iterative is? I can send you the slides if you want to. How many of you know what iterative is? What's the word iterative means? Repeating, right? So if you are doing something repeatedly, then that's iterative. So in software development methodology, over the enhancement of this waterfall, doing it once kind of thing, what happened was over the age from, let's say, last 40 years, we also started breaking up into smaller pieces, doing some things iteratively, getting that completed, and then doing the next phase, and then doing the next phase. What we did was really breaking up the waterfall into smaller waterfalls, right? Agile uses that principle and beyond. Now, that's iterative development. Now, what happens here, the additional part is the requirements and the solutions evolve through collaboration. Before, what happened was the requirements were done by a group of people that were responsible for interacting with the customers, understanding what is required to be done, and coming up with a set of requirements. When they finished it all, then they handed it over to the engineering team. Now you go and develop these things. Now what happened in the process, things got lost in translation. It also got delayed because of that. These people went on studying for a year, or let's say 6 months. And then they gave it to the engineering team, and the engineering took it and developed something for another year or 6 months or whatever. From that time, from the beginning to the end, it was already 1 year. Now, in those days, when the requirements were very static, it didn't matter so much. But now things are moving very fast, especially in software industry. You people must have seen, you are exposed to all the rapid development that's happening. You have all these applications at your fingertips on your iPhone or Android phones and all. 1 year is too long a period. So requirements and solutions have to come through a collaborative way. Interacting with customers, interacting with product owners who define the product, interacting with the engineering team, they all need to happen together. And that's the collaboration that Agile is going to bring. And then self-organizing and cross-functional teams. Previously, there used to be hard teams. This is a requirements team. This is an analyst team. This is an engineering team that writes code. This is a team that tests software. All these kind of very rigid boundaries, and things would be thrown across the fence from one to the other. That was no longer possible because that would take a lot of time when things were transitioning from one phase to the other. So cross-functional teams were a necessity. Now, if cross-functional teams are there, and if the organization is all very rigid, that this is an engine development team, this is a test team, this is a requirements team, in big companies, that's how it is. It used to be. You had to bring them all together. And so the teams had to come together in a self-organizing way, what are all required. There was no longer need for one person that kept the whip saying, controlling, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. Everyone had to understand what is required to be solving in this problem, and they had to come together. That's self-organizing and cross-functional teams. Agile brings all these things together. And how it brings together, we'll look at it a little bit, but probably this talk is going to just expose you to the terms, and then you can look look up more. There is a lot of material, very useful, very interesting stuff in this area going on. So this is what we talked about, breaking the product development into small increments, and then not wasting or spending too much time on upfront requirements and design. You do that concurrently. As parts of it get defined, designed, you start coding, you start testing together, and then you start deploying it and working with the customers to see, is this what you said you wanted? If not, I'm going to go and fix it and change it and bring it to you quickly. Rather than saying, you said this 1 year ago and I bring it to you 1 year later, and then you say, oh, this is not what I meant, then the whole project is a flop. How do you reduce that kind of a failure is what Agile is all about. And then the short time frames are called time boxes, and typically it's lasting 1 to 4 weeks of iteration time, which means within 1 week you come up with some requirements, you code that, you test that, you deploy that, take it to the customer and say, look, this is what you asked, do you agree? And then bring it back. No, if it says no, no, then you make changes. If they say yes, go on to build the next segment, like that, right? That's what Agile is all about. Scrum is a framework, one of the Agile ways to manage the project. When you have a team of people doing things together, then you organize. How many of you know the game rugby? Okay. So in rugby, there is a term, the Scrum term comes from there, where the team huddles together and decides what their strategy is, and they go away and implement that strategy. That's where the term Scrum came from. So the team of people coming together, huddling together, so there are no longer, in Agile, there are no longer all these long meetings where people sit together for hours and come up with requirements, come up with all the execution steps. None of those kind of things. It's huddling together, daily 15-minute stand-ups. That's what the meetings are called. And deciding what they need to do for the day and go away, implement, come back, integrate, put them together. Very fast happening. That's the Scrum. So from a team perspective, Scrum is that process that enables that. It's a framework for managing the process of Agile. There are other terms as well, other frameworks that are useful in an Agile. One is called a Kanban. I'm just introducing the terms. You guys can look up whatever those things mean. I'm not going to talk about Kanban. Kanban is a way, how many of you have gone to a shop where cars are fixed? Cars or motorbikes or whatever they fixed. How many of you have gone? Anybody familiar with that? So what happens is, if they have various cars, they go through a pipeline of this work needs to be done, that work needs to be done. They're all in different phases. And the car goes through all these different phases. Now, if you represent them graphically, that is a Kanban board. The term is called Kanban, where, oh, you have 10 cars. This car is, there is something that needs to be fixed in the engine. Here, some dent is there that needs to be fixed. So one after the other, you take the car through those different steps. You represent them on a graphical board, that becomes the Kanban board. In software, as I told, things are very abstract. How do you make it very visible to people is you put them on that board. This module, what I have developed, this is in this state. It has been developed, it has been architected, it has been developed, this has been tested, it has been deployed, and then it goes through different terms. You can combine Scrum and Kanban and we call it Scrumban. Now, all those different frameworks do exist within Agile, but I'm just going to talk more about Scrum only in this case. Sorry, tell me if it's too abstract. I'm trying to relate it to your common experiences so that I'm not going too deep into these things, and then you can look it up. You just do Google Agile, you'll get hundreds and hundreds of hits. Very useful documentation. So this is coming from Wikipedia. I just took that directly so that I can talk about it. So software development had gone through some bad phase in terms of how successful it was. Initially, in the 60s, when software was being developed, there were all these very well-established steps for waterfall development were put in place. That worked at that time, but as time evolved, it wasn't successful anymore. The project sizes were different compared to what it used to be, and rate of how the project had to be completed, that time period got crushed. In olden days, there were 10-year projects, 15-year projects, 2-year projects, even smaller projects took a lot of time in the US, all these things. But that time frame shrunk a lot. So in 2001, a group of people got together somewhere in Utah, and they came up with a manifesto for agile software development. They started talking about how to do a better way of developing software, and they put 4 values together. The individuals and interactions over processes and tools. In waterfall development, what became very important was, because it was very abstract, they put a very rigid process in place, and they put all the tools in place. So it was very important, what process are you following, what tool are you following, very rigid. They said, more than that, it's people that need to interact together. And so that became important in Agile. You will see a little bit more of that here, but you should understand that these principles are the ones that guide Agile software development. Working software over comprehensive documentation. So in waterfall, what they emphasized was, you have to write down your design, you have to write down your requirements. Lot of things you have to write down before you actually did the work. But what happens in software, if any of you have written software, is that when you start writing the code, the way you write the software, what you write in the software becomes very different from what you initially thought about, because what you think is in your mind, but when you put it into computer, you have to specify exactly what needs to be done, and what you think is not exactly what happens when you write into computer. So if you wrote some design and then started coding it, what you designed and what you coded will be very different. So people started realizing that, and so they said, you need to have a working software all the time rather than writing a comprehensive documentation. Because it didn't matter, as I was telling in that example, 10, 20, 90%. 90% things were all very good on paper. But when you had to get the working software, it was very different. So if you have a working software at every step of the way, at 10%, you have 10% of the software working. 20%, you have 20% of the software working. Then it didn't matter whether you had a comprehensive documentation or not, the product was that much ready. So that's why importance was given to working software over comprehensive documentation. Customer collaboration over contract negotiations. If you have been in a company that does work for somebody as a customer, first thing that happens is, oh, let's write a contract. You're going to give me this at the end of 6 months. And they will specify all the things that needs to be done and a contract is signed. It doesn't matter whether a contract is signed or not, because when somebody thought about a functionality, how it should be implemented on your mobile phone or anywhere, now you have a model for many of these things. But when you start thinking about something totally different from what is already existing, let's say in cloud computing, in artificial intelligence, machine learning, there is so much going on that you cannot even comprehend what's going to come out as a result. And if such a situation is there, there is no point in negotiating a hard contract when you cannot even put it in practice. So what's important is collaborating with the customer. The customer is interacting with you on a daily basis, weekly basis, looking at what's coming out. And based on that, you work your way forward. So that's why customer collaboration became important over contract negotiation. And then responding to change over following a plan. What happens in waterfall is that there is a plan put in place at the beginning of the project. Now, they don't want us to deviate from that plan. What happens is that if you deviate from a plan, if you go into any different big companies and all, you find out that if you deviate a plan, there is an elaborate process called the change management methodology. And it makes it very expensive to change from a plan. It's like you go to the war. And in the war, you plan everything. When you go to the war, if your life is at stake, if your platoon's life is at stake, you don't say, no, we have planned this way, we are just going to go there. That's not possible, because if you go there, you'll get killed. When you see the reality on the ground, you have to change. So adapting to change is more important than following a plan. And that's the same analogy in software development. When you get to reality, it's very different from what you thought is going to happen before. And so responding to change is more important over following a plan. So these were the 4 principles that values that they put together, right? Actually, these are the 4 principles that they put together. Now, they didn't say that it's not important to do processes and tools, it's not important to have a comprehensive documentation or any of those things. There is a value in the items on the right, but you have to put more value to the items on the left. That's the principle of Agile. Okay. Oh, it doesn't show the print on the previous slide. It's not showing the print on the previous slide. Yeah. See, here it's there, it doesn't show that. Oh, okay. Okay, so here are some of the values that Agile software development came across, right? Satisfying the customer, welcoming change, delivering frequently, collaborating daily. These are all the verbalizing the principles that I actually talked about, right? So these are all there in, if you go to agilemanifesto.org, all these things are already documented and lot of explanation is there and you can look at it from there, okay? Any questions on this? Does it make sense what I'm talking about? Yes? Okay. So here is a little cheat sheet on what Scrum is all about, okay? I'm not going to go through everything. This is actually, even this is available on Google. You can just go and Google for Scrum cheat sheet and it will give you this one. You can look at each individual item there. So what is a Scrum team? Who is a product owner? So there are 3 main parts of an Agile team. One is a product owner who is a customer representative who tells what needs to be developed. One is a Scrum Master who is like a project manager, but there is a difference. In a project manager, it's a command and control. Project manager says what needs to be done, and everybody listens to that project manager and does that. In Agile, that does not work. It's everybody needs to understand what needs to be done, and they come together. Scrum Master is more of a coordinator, and there is a term called servant leader. Scrum Master is like a servant of the team. You know, the ministers are supposed to be like, the minister word that came is like a servant of the people kind of thing. But the term has lost its meaning here. But similarly, a Scrum Master is a servant leader. He is there, or he or she is there, to make sure that the team is productive, right? So these are the three main important main terms: Scrum team, product owner, and the Scrum Master. These three groups coming together form the Agile unit. Product backlog. So just like how requirements were all listed out previously, now the term that is used in Agile is called a product backlog, where the backlog is written in terms of a user story. So instead of hard requirements, the requirements come in the form of, as a customer, I want to be able to make a phone call from my mobile phone. That's a user story, very simplistic user story. Now, there are a lot of things that need to be done for getting that phone call done. But your basic thing is, if I can make a phone call, I develop that as a user story. Then the call needs to be cut off once I complete. That's another user story. All these things can be another master user story, but you can break it down into smaller user stories and implement them each one individually. And there is a concept of vertical slicing I'll talk about. You should be able to demonstrate each feature independent of the other and build one on top of the other. That's the principle of Agile, where you can show a working product. Instead of taking 1 year or 6 months to develop the whole application, you should be able to do something very concrete within 2 weeks or 4 weeks as a user story. And then you build another user story, bring them together, more functionality. Another user story, bring them together, more functionality. So in the end, at the end of 6 months, you see everything working, but you also had things working all along the way. And in cases where there are smaller companies that need to make money, you can bring 3 of those user stories together, good enough to run a pilot with your customer, and they can run pilot with their customers, and you can realize revenue faster. So there are many of these techniques that I work with many startups right now that's called the lean startup mode, where you work with the companies to get these things done quickly, take it to the market, get early feedback from them, and then if you think that this whole thing is not going to work, you pivot, you change your direction and do something else. Bigger companies, they didn't need to do that. But smaller startups, when the money is really scarce, when you really want to get to a product very quickly, Agile techniques help a lot. So that's where it is useful. So that's about the user story. That's about the product backlog. Product backlog is a list of everything that you want to do, but you don't have to elaborate them. What you want to develop in a couple of weeks, that time box is called a sprint. You know, marathon and sprints. Sprints are 100-meter dash is a sprint. 13.2 miles or 25 kilometers is a marathon, half marathon.